Greetings viewers and welcome to today's info sharing snippet. We'll be covering the purchasing cycle within Sage Trend Evolution. Now there are different sequences that can be used within the purchasing cycle, and we're covering those options in our today's presentation. The purchasing process or purchasing cycle is really a link between suppliers and stock items. And firstly, if we go to our suppliers and we look at a supplier's master file, in each supplier's master record, we have an inventory tab. So I've got my inventory items tab here, and on this particular tab, we're able to link certain stock items from our existing master file of stock items and link them to a supplier record. So if I say select, I can then go into my inventory master file and go link certain stock items to my supplier. And I can then go and link multiple stock items to that supplier, because really it's a case of you are certain of instances whereby you purchase multiple stock items from the same supplier. So I've done my link and I can close that. And once again, I can then go link other stock items to the relevant supplier records. I'm also able to then go link suppliers to individual stock items. Under my inventory menu, I'm going to go into my supplier or inventory master file, inventory maintenance, inventory items. And I can then, for example, go and specify a stock item. On the stock item, we have a suppliers tab, and I can select a supplier and link that supplier to the stock item. And also link multiple suppliers to the stock item. And what you'll notice is that we've got a preferred supplier parameter there where we can specify who is the preferred supplier when ordering this item. What you'll notice is that we can change the preferred supplier. However, you are only able to have one preferred supplier linked to a particular inventory item. There's also a very important parameter with regards to the purchasing cycle, and that can be found under inventory maintenance, inventory defaults. Under the goods received voucher tab, we have an option that specifies separate GRV from supplier invoice. So this really is a very important parameter with regards to purchasing, as you may have certain instances whereby order is placed with a supplier. The goods are physically received, however, the supplier invoice is only received at a later stage. And this parameter caters for those type of scenarios. So in this instance, I've selected to separate GRV from supplier invoice. Right, so now we can begin with the purchasing cycle. I'm now going to go into my order entry module, and under transactions, I'm going to go and process a purchase order. Order entry, transactions, purchase order. I have my purchase order screen there, and I'm specifying the supplier. And you'll see I've got a couple of details there with regards to order date, due date, etc., and some information where I can link a project, etc. I've got an automated PO order being generated, and now it's really a case of going to the line items and specifying which items are going to be ordered. Quantity. And I can then go add additional items as and when they are being ordered. Right, so I've got my details of the items to be ordered, and I can now use the place order option. If I print the order, I've got details about the items ordered and the order number. Now, the order number and I would then just send this document to my supplier with details of the purchase order. Right, so that's the phase one of the process completed. The next sequence would be when the goods are physically received, and I would then need to receive those goods into the system. Opening up my purchase order, and I then go into the open option, where I'm now going to go locate the purchase order. So under document type, I'm going to use the POGRV feature, and I'm able to go and filter and search on certain parameters there, for example, supplier, reference, etc. I'm going to use the date option, click on the find button, and there I have an unprocessed GRV. If I select that particular unprocessed GRV, I've now got the line items, and I'm simply going to confirm the quantity received. So in this instance, 60 units were ordered, and the full 60 quantity received, and same for line 2, 30 ordered, 30 received. I've got my GRV number there, and now really it's a case of saying receive the stock item. And I can then go print my goods received voucher, and it's going to give me details, quantity ordered, quantity received, etc. So these goods have physically been received, and they have now been entered into the system. The next phase would be to process the supplier invoice. So I'm going to go to my open option once again on the purchase order screen. And I'm now going to look for the POSINV option and filter on the date or the transaction date. And now I have an unprocessed supplier invoice. So there's my purchase order number, my GRV number, and now I'm going to go process the supplier invoice. Right, so there's my line items, and what you notice now is that the receive stock and place order options are not available. I'm going to use the process invoice. And really now it's specifying the invoice quantity, and very importantly, I now need to insert the supplier invoice number. Very important to insert that information specifically for reference purposes. So there's my supplier invoice number, and I'm going to say process invoice. If I view my supplier invoice, I've got details of the items, the PO number, supplier invoice number, and the GRV number. And that is the purchasing cycle. Now, there may be some variations with regards to the purchasing cycle. So one of the variations may be is that if I'm going to process a new purchase order, I've got my PO number there, and I'm going to go specify once again the items to be ordered. Right, so in this instance, I'm going to use the place order, but in this particular scenario, the goods and the supplier invoice received simultaneously. So I'm going to once again place the order. And I'm now going to go and link the GRV and the supplier invoice to the unprocessed purchase order. Open. And I'm now going to look for the POGRV feature. Find. And what you see there is I now have an unprocessed GRV. There's my PO number. And I'm then once again going to confirm the quantities. So in this instance, 40 ordered, 40 received, 55 ordered, 55 received. In this instance, as I mentioned, the goods and the supply invoice received simultaneously. So I can simply use a process invoice feature, and I'm just going to add the supply invoice number and process the transaction. And if I print my supply invoice, I've got details of quantity ordered, quantity received, the PO number, GRV number, and my supply invoice number. That really is a scenario whereby the goods and the supply invoice are received simultaneously. Now, our third scenario could be where you have a partial delivery. So, for example, you may have ordered a certain quantity, however, the supplier only delivers a portion of that quantity. Right, so I'm going to process a new purchase order and once again specify the items that were ordered. Right, so there's my order. I've got my order number there together with the details, and I'm then going to say place the order. Right, in this particular scenario, we are going to only be receiving a portion of those goods and orders. So back into my purchase order, I'm now going to open to locate the order, specify the PO/GRV option, and I've now got an unprocessed GRV. Now, in this instance, 45 units were ordered, and in this instance, I'm going to say that only, for example, 40 were received. And on line number 2, 19 were ordered, however, 17 were received. So what we have now is we received goods, but not the full quantity that was ordered. So I've got my GRV number, and I'm going to receive the stock. So if I check my document, it tells me that on the GRV that 45 were ordered, 40 were received on line 1, line 2, 19 ordered, and 17 received. Right. So I can close that screen. And now, if I then go to open, I'm now going to go and locate the POSINV. The supplier has now invoiced me for the partial quantity that was delivered. Unprocessed supply invoice. And once again, you see 40 received, invoiced 40, etc. And I'm then going to insert my supply invoice number and right. So now the next phase would be is when the remaining quantities on the order are now delivered. So once again, back into purchase order. I'm now going to go locate that order, POGRV, and you'll see that we now have a state for a partially processed GRV. So there's my initial purchase order. There was a GRV number where the partial quantities were received, and now we have a remaining purchase order, which is in a state of partially processed. Right, so as you can see here, we've got 45 ordered initially, 40 being received previously, and now we can just say the remainder was delivered by the supplier. And same scenario applied on line 2. 19 ordered, 17 already received, and the remaining 2 can now be received. There's my GRV number, PO number, and I'm going to say receive stock. And the final step would then be to process the invoice from the supplier, which would then be the invoice for the remaining items that were partially delivered. So I'm going to once again use the POSINV feature. Find, I've now got my unprocessed supplier invoice. Notice the same order number, different GRV numbers. And there we go. And we can now complete the transaction. So supply invoice number would need to be added and process the right. So the remaining 5 were on order, and then the remaining 5 have been invoiced on line 5, the remaining 2 units on line 2. Right, so that's the process completed. So as you can see is that we have the ability to specify partial processing, which certainly could happen within your environment whereby not all the goods on the purchase order are delivered by the supplier at the same time. Now, the process we've seen here is really where, for example, you're ordering stock item from the supplier. However, in practice, you certainly could have the ability where you are incurring an expense from a supplier for non-stock items. And before we process those type of transactions, very importantly, that if we are going to be processing purchasing items which are non-stock, we need to go firstly to our general ledger, maintenance, and accounts. And if we, for example, look at maybe one of our general ledger accounts, let's just take, for example, equipment rental, and edit the account, you'll notice is that we have an inventory tab on the account. And if I go into my inventory tab, there's an option to allow sales transactions, allow purchases transactions. So very importantly is that if you are going to be processing a purchase order for a non-stock item, being a GL account, you need to enable the relevant option on this screen so that you can allocate that expense to relevant GL accounts. So I've said allow purchases transactions and allow sales transactions for this GL account. Right, I'm now going to go back into order entry, transactions purchase order, and I'm going to process the purchase order now, but it's going to be for a non-stock item. And I'm going to use the module as being GL. And what you notice on my drop down, I now have the various accounts on which that particular parameter has been enabled, which allows for sales or purchases transactions. And I can now go and link my PO to the relevant GL account. So I'm going to go link it, for example, to equipment rental. I'm now going to specify the quantity and the price of that item. Right, so there's my PO number, GRV information, and I'm now simply going to say place the order. If I look at my purchase order now, I've got details there about the purchase order number, and I've got details of the item code, in this case being the expense or the GL account that I'm allocating this particular purchase order to. And the next step would really be to go and process the supplier invoice. So back into purchase order. I'm now going to say open, locate the purchase order, POSINV. Let's just change this slightly. Let's just change the parameters there. And you'll see that I now have an unprocessed document. If I select the document, I've now got details of the GL account that the order has been allocated to, and I can then simply confirm the quantity or confirm and specify the supply invoice number. And in this instance, they would not receive stock won't really be applicable. I can simply say process the invoice. And there I've got my supply invoice, the relevant details, purchase order, supply invoice information, and the GL account that this transaction has been allocated to. Right. And that really is the option where we've got where, for example, where you're purchasing items which are non-stock. Now, very often in practice or in your business processes, you may need to return items to a supplier. And for that process, we need to complete a document called a return to supplier. So under our inventory module, I'm going to go to transactions, and we then have a return to supplier document. Now, I'm now going to go link the supply invoice return supplier. So the easiest way to do that would be to go to open, and I'm now going to specify POSINV, the transaction date, and use the find option. And as you can see, there's details of all the purchase orders, archived supply invoices, etc. So I'm going to go locate the particular document that I want to return to the supplier. And very useful, I have the load as linked feature. The load as linked feature is simply going to take all the lines from the particular document I've selected and load them onto my return to supplier. Specified my document, load as linked, and there we have our stock item. So it's going to tell me the quantity ordered on that particular document. And now it's very important to realize is that there may be instances where not the full quantity is being returned. So for example, in this instance, there were 40 units ordered and received. However, for example, maybe only 35 are going to be returned. So I'm going to say, for example, in this case, 35 of the 40 were returned. And on line number 2, for example, maybe 5 were returned. So I am able to process return to supplier for a portion of those goods to be returned. You'll see that I've now got my PO number there, which was original order number. I've then got details of the supply invoice number, and I've then got details of my RTS, my return to supplier. And now it's really a case of I've got the details there, same process, and I can view or print the return to supplier document. Tells me that these were the quantities returned. There's my total return quantity, and the transaction has now been updated on the supplier's account. At this point, I'm also able to allocate the return to supplier to the invoice that was applicable. I can do that now, or I can allocate that transaction at a later stage. Say no, and those goods have then returned to supplier. The supplier record or account has been updated on my system, as well as the stock quantities. And there we have our purchasing cycle. So as you can see, a couple of scenarios that you can make use of in order entry, being the process from purchase order to receiving of the goods, or goods received voucher, and then from there the supply invoice. Alternatively, purchase order and processing the goods received voucher and supply invoice simultaneously. When processing transactions which are for non-stock units or non-stock items, always ensure that the relevant GL account, the parameter on the GL account has been updated to allow for purchases transactions. Process the transaction via purchase order. And then if goods need to be returned to supplier, processing an RTS whereby we can link the relevant supplier invoice to the RTS and then specify the goods that are going to be returned. I do hope you've enjoyed my presentation. Thank you for tuning in. It's over and out from me, and goodbye.